With any show as big as Doctor Who, there are bound to be spin-offs, or at least spin-off attempts. Indeed, even as far back as 1981, Doctor Who tried to branch out with a mind-numbingly dull spin-off pilot for K9 and Company, or as I like to call it, alcoholic Sarah Jane staring at the camera dead inside. This essentially scared off any hope for a proper Doctor Who TV spin-off for many years. And no, random commenter about to type the letters BBV, those videos don't count in this context. However, when Doctor Who returned to TV screens in 2005 with the hugely successful Series 1, the franchise saw a significant rejuvenation and a popularity not seen for decades. This success was so prominent that in 2005, Doctor Who showrunner Russell T Davies was approached by BBC Three to make a post-Watershed, mature sci-fi show, which eventually became Torchwood, a Doctor Who spin-off that Davies adapted from his abandoned Buffy the Vampire Slayer-esque series, Excalibur. Torchwood centres around the popular character Captain Jack Harkness, who leads a team of alien hunters against all sorts of threats, like throat-ripping weevils, demons, and, sex gas. But was the very first episode, Everything Changes, able to use the success of Doctor Who to establish this new show effectively? Or did it fail to match the high expectations set by its beloved parent show? Well, grab your Resurrection Gauntlet and empty your pocket change into the swear jar, because we're about to take a deep dive into the very first episode of Torchwood.
The 21st century is when it all changes. You gotta be ready.
What does that mean?
Don't know, it just sounds good.
Because Torchwood is a drastically different show to Doctor Who, it needed to establish this difference immediately, which it does in the very first scene. It opens with a city at night, a dead, bloody body under investigation in the pouring down rain. Within the first two shots, the tone is instantly different from Doctor Who, telling you that this is more adult oriented from the get-go, since Doctor Who has always been careful with how dead bodies are shown, avoiding any blood or too much realism, but that limit just isn't applicable here. I also think it's really interesting how Gwen and Andy are standing there in the freezing cold rain at a murder scene, but she's just drinking coffee and they're chatting about plans for Friday night. It creates a sense of dissonance, showing how familiar these characters are with nights like this. Anyone else would be horrified at seeing a dead body, but this is their daily job, so it's nothing to them. They're completely desensitized to it, so it's no different to water cooler chat. Personally, I think it immediately makes Gwen different to the main show companions, with her already used to seeing death and horrific stuff. So in a way it kind of reflects the aspect of the audience, who have also become used to seeing the horrors of the main show, and can now relate to an audience surrogate who is also desensitized to it. This familiarity means the arrival of Torchwood feels even more important than it would otherwise feel, since all the forensics people are cleared out of the area for Torchwood to arrive, and our protagonists take note of the shift in power, since this is something they're not used to seeing. Torchwood are instantly given a sense of importance because of this, and the forensics guy explains what Torchwood appears to be, which is good world building as it establishes that Torchwood have a reputation in this universe. People know they exist, which is reflected later on, when Andy speculates about them being fancy DNA specialists. It tells us that this is a shadowy group that just show up and take over a scene so easily. I also think that this scene does a very good job of introducing the new team dynamic of the show, with everyone having a role in the situation. Susie is there to reanimate the body, Owen is there to film it for analysis, and Tosh is there to talk to the dead person, whilst Jack is there to organise the whole thing. It does a great job of showing how this team dynamic fits into the show, since viewers would be used to the much smaller, intimate dynamic of the Doctor and one companion, compared to this group of 4, or as shown later, 5. I also love the mystery of the Resurrection Gauntlet. It just feels so Doctor Who. This mysterious gauntlet that can somehow reanimate the dead. It fits so well within the universe of the show, especially because Captain Jack himself seems to reflect upon using it being wrong.
Maybe there's no right way of doing it.
Everything Changes was written by Russell T Davies, who was Doctor Who showrunner at the time. I think this really shows because he uses the exact same winning formula that worked for the episode Rose. This episode is set up almost identically to that one. Much like Rose with the Doctor, Gwen gets caught up in Captain Jack's business, then goes on an investigation to find out more, before confronting him and losing him again, before they cross paths at the end and she gets brought on board. I think this through line works so well when Everything Changes. Gwen is the curious companion with a sense of initiative, much like a companion on the main show, and Captain Jack is the mysterious alien figure with all kinds of quirky mannerisms and strange knowledge, shown when he talks about estrogen being part of the water cycle. These parallels continue throughout in very smart, subtle ways, which I think does a lot to engage the viewer and use their familiarity with Doctor Who to keep them on board. I think that Davies does a good job of reasoning how Gwen crosses paths with Jack again. She gets knocked into a wooden wall whilst breaking up a pub fight, with her seeing Jack again as she's leaving the hospital. I think it's a nice, natural feeling coincidence that progresses the story along nicely, to prompt Gwen getting more curious about this mystery. Her interest in Torchwood was set up well early on, since she spied on their use of the gauntlet. Even though she's used to seeing dead bodies, this is the first one she's ever seen come back to life. So something like that would clearly have a big effect on her, which is shown as she's unable to sleep, constantly thinking about what she saw. I just think that it's a great way to rationalise her curiosity and set the events of the episode into motion, since it's like that Elton Pope experience of seeing something so alien and strange and being determined to find answers. After seeing Captain Jack in the hospital, Gwen follows him upstairs to a sealed off area, which, in the Doctor Who universe, usually means instant death. What is it about Torchwood and death in shady, sealed off areas? She comes across a so-called Weevil, which immediately looks alien, explaining Torchwood's presence there, but I really appreciate that Gwen still tries to be rational about it, thinking it's just a well-made mask. I think the Weevils are a good starter monster for the episode. Much like the Autons in Rose, they're just there to inject something alien into the proceedings. You don't need a big, world-threatening threat, but you also need to tell the viewer it is a sci-fi show. I think the Weevils strike this balance well, along with providing good world building, as we're told they're always lurking underneath Cardiff, having come through the rift. I also like that Jack mentions that the Weevils have been coming to the surface more often for an unknown reason. As far as I can remember, they never outright explain this, but I've always thought that it's because of Torchwood's experiments with the Resurrection Gauntlet, since later episodes would establish a proper link between the Gauntlet and the Weevils. I also think that Gwen's initial refusal to believe the Weevil is real makes her a more relatable, grounded protagonist, because she's not quick to accept the existence of horrific alien monsters in boiler suits that rip your throat out. It's the perfect way to both justify Gwen's curiosity and perpetuate it, since she chases the Torchwood car and runs the plates, trying to identify them. I mean, the first thing she saw them do was reanimate a corpse, and now she's just seen them hanging around with a throat-eating monster, so it feels completely rational for her to be just a little bit suspicious of them and who they are. I think everything about Torchwood is set up as such a good mystery. Every aspect of them is alien and mysterious, from that resurrection of the dead to the team disappearing into thin air in the middle of the street. I think it does such a great job of building them up as this shadowy, alien presence, lurking at the fringes of our day-to-day lives, especially because of the explanation that the only Captain Jack on record is a missing soldier from World War II, who vanished during the Blitz. It's a piece of dramatic irony because any viewer familiar with the character of the main show would know that this is the same Jack and that he disappeared because of the Doctor. But Gwen obviously doesn't know this, so it creates a great mysterious aura around Jack, which even he plays into because he knows the truth.
Well, that couldn't be me. Could it?
I think it says a lot about Gwen's intelligence and capability that she picks up on the idea of using pizza delivery as a way to find and infiltrate Torchwood. Anyone else would have just given up and been stumped at this dead end, unable to think of what to do next. But Gwen works out that Torchwood would order pizza just like regular people would, so that's how she finds them. I just think it's so good for her character, especially as we find out she was standing out there for hours, which shows her determination to find answers. Then the scene of Gwen entering Torchwood is such a great moment in my opinion. She steps out into this giant underground lair filled with all of these workstations and strange technology. It really does feel like a secret base, so mysterious and strange. I kind of think it creates the same effect as a companion entering the TARDIS for the first time and finding out it's bigger on the inside, being overwhelmed by this reality-shattering revelation. It all feels so mystical and tense before that tension is broken by Owen and Tosh laughing, revealing that they had all been pretending not to see Gwen as she entered. Not only does this moment add some levity to the situation, I think it also humanises the Torchwood team in a way, removing that almost sinister barrier of mystery, showing us that these actually are just normal people like any other one of us. It allows us to warm to the idea of them being protagonists, since we're shown this more casual and playful side of them. I also like that this scene has Gwen still trying to rationalise everything she's seen, but Jack knows she's smarter than that, so forces her to keep correcting herself until she finally admits that they brought the body back to life, rather than reviving or resuscitating the body. I think that it shows her finally coming to terms with this entirely new reality for her, not wanting to admit that this kind of stuff is real, but she knows exactly what she saw. Having Gwen confront the Torchwood team halfway through the episode is a very good story beat to include, since it parallels that scene from Rose where the Doctor and Rose have that conversation about who he is and what he's doing. In this case, Jack takes Gwen out for a drink to explain what Torchwood is, allowing us to get a sense of what they do and who they are, even if there is still a shroud of mystery around them. Jack continues his Doctor-like role as he explains the perception filter on the lift, spewing out technobabble to Gwen, who just can't quite comprehend it. Again, like a Doctor Who companion. I do appreciate that the TARDIS is the reason for the perception filter being in that spot, since it's exactly where the TARDIS landed in Boomtown, and presumably many other times before that episode. I feel like it creates a sense of connectivity between the two shows, beyond just having Torchwood and Jack there, since Doctor Who has consequences shown in the Torchwood spin-off. This connectivity is continued during the scene in the pub, where Jack talks about how the population just can't seem to accept the reality of aliens existing, even after the Sycorax invasion and the Battle of Canary Wharf. It's absolutely the right observation for the characters to make, since Russell T Davies always liked to create cohesion and connectivity within his Doctor Who universe. So I like this exploration of the concept here, addressing how people just continue to refuse the existence of aliens, even after shop mannequins going on murder sprees, a spaceship crashing into Big Ben, a giant asteroid parking above London, and cyborgs invading, only to have a big battle with millions of genocidal pepper pots. Even after all of that, people still come up with excuses and reasons to deny alien life, so Jack serves as the audience's voice when he questions what it would take for people to finally accept the existence of aliens.
No, I'll tell you what I don't understand. You're gonna rattle on with that how can this be true kind of shtick. What's it gonna take for you people?
I also like how they explore the reality of Torchwood's existence. Jack explains the basics and why it's in Cardiff, essentially serving as a speedrun of the Doctor Who episodes that set up the Rift and Torchwood. Not only does it help reintroduce people to these concepts from the main show, but it also helps explain everything to new viewers who don't watch Doctor Who and might not even know about the connection to the show. I think that it perfectly straddles the line of appealing to existing Doctor Who fans and brand new fans, just like the episode Rose did back in Series 1, once again using that winning formula that made the Doctor Who revival such a success. Jack also explains how Torchwood works and that they're a completely separate entity not controlled by the government or the police. I think it lends credence to their mysterious presence, along with Gwen rightfully bringing up how their acquisition of alien technology could be bad. She serves as the human heart of the story, since she's still tethered to reality, meaning she's disgusted at how Torchwood is using the glove. They have a complete disregard for the humans they're resurrecting, only interested in their own jobs and work. It shows that she's a very moral character, along with showing that Torchwood 3 really isn't that different to Torchwood 1 after all. Viewers familiar with the main show would know that Torchwood 1 indeed used the alien tech for bad things, weaponizing it for use in re-establishing a British Empire. Even though Torchwood 3 isn't this extreme, that same core is still seeping through, despite Jack trying to regulate the organisation more by keeping things more in control, although we find out that isn't exactly working very well. Yes, as it turns out, the other members of the team are using alien technology off base. I think this montage is a very good scene which shows us the deep familiarity they have with this tech and their jobs, but it also tells us a lot about them as characters. Owen is a bit of a floozy, so he uses the alien tech to sleep with people, with a worrying lack of consent. Tosh is a very scientific and intelligent person, so she uses alien tech to study books. And lastly, Susie is shown to be operating the glove on a dead fly, which shows her obsession with the glove, which comes up during the climax. It's a very subtle way to show their characteristics since this episode can't really dedicate time to introducing them properly, so the montage is a quick way of doing that, essentially giving us the cliff notes for each of the team, including Yanto, who cleans up after them by wiping Gwen's computer of her notes of Torchwood. I really love the scene of Gwen desperate to remember Torchwood after she finds out Jack has spiked her drink with the amnesia drug Retcon, which will make her fall asleep and forget everything about him and Torchwood. I think there's a real sense of tension as she races home to try and write down what she's learned. It feels like the stakes are high since Gwen has put so much effort into discovering who these people are, just for it to be snatched away from her. Yanto hacking into her computer to delete her notes gives us a sense of just how powerful Torchwood is, really selling the presence of this mysterious organisation, simply wiping Gwen's memory of them that easily. It's like the memory erasers in Men in Black. It kind of makes you wonder how many other people they've done this to, just mopping up any loose ends like this and going on with their day. I do also like how Davies restores Gwen's memory. It's done in a very smart way, with her going about her day as normal, but then her mind slowly gets triggered by the knife she sees, the recollections becoming stronger and more vivid over the course of that day, eventually causing her to have yet another sleepless night, just like she did after she first encountered Torchwood at the murder scene. It's quite clever, her mind overpowering the retcon just enough for her to go to the Millennium Center, which just so happens to be where Torchwood is. It's a nice progression, piecing it together slowly and methodically, rather than just restoring her memories instantly. If they had been instantly restored, the scene of her losing them would have lost its impact. But because the memories come back in this clever way, the mind wipe doesn't feel pointless. And she happens to remember just enough to put her in the right place at the right time, since she encounters Susie, who we find out was the killer all along. In a nice twist, it turns out that Susie was actually the serial killer the whole time. I like how they pull this twist off, because the marketing of the series up until this point had made it seem like she would be a regular cast member, who would continue to be part of the team, so it's a good bait and switch here. I also like how her morality is explored during this scene. She's not an evil person, she's simply become obsessed with the gauntlet and the power it holds, driving her to these extreme means of murdering people to test it out. I think it provides a lot of nuance and layers, illustrating just how much a job like this can consume a person's life. Susie is like an addict desperate for her next fix, killing just to use the gauntlet again. She means well, wanting to use the gauntlet for positivity, to stop people from dying, but it's led her down this dark path. She's not an evil, cackling villain with some grand scheme. She just believed that these ends would justify these means.
I loved this job, I really loved it. And now I've got to run.
I think this scene really makes you feel her emotional and existential crisis, since working at Torchwood has only exposed her to the worst of extraterrestrial life, making space seem incredibly hostile and evil. It makes it seem like everything in space is out to get us, so it would create a very oppressive and isolating feeling of dread. I think that makes Susie quite relatable and almost sympathetic in a way, since that's a genuine worry a lot of people have about the universe. However, as Susie's giving her monologue to almost justify her actions to herself, Captain Jack appears on the lift, hidden by the perception filter. Since he explained the mechanics of the filter earlier, we expect him to be hidden here, but then Susie just turns and shoots him right in the head, since she's worked at Torchwood long enough for the filter not to work on her. It's just so sudden and blunt, really feeling like a shock which represents how sudden death can be, because, you know, being shot in the face isn't exactly something you see coming. I think it's especially important to note that at this point it wasn't known that Jack couldn't die. When this happened, the viewer would have only seen the one resurrection on the game station, so his death and resurrection here is a complete shock, but actually it's also quite fitting for the episode. The whole story has been about resurrecting the dead. It begins with someone dying and coming back to life, and guess how it ends? That's right, Captain Jack dying and then coming back to life, with the revelation that he can't die.
Again, it's like poetry, it's sort of they rhyme.
I think it's great that Gwen gets completely overwhelmed during this scene. Yes, she's used to seeing death, but here she gets the triple whammy of Jack coming back to life, Susie killing herself in front of her, and then all her memories come flooding back in. We already saw at the beginning of the episode how much the resurrection of the murder victim affected Gwen, so now she has to deal with that shock again, in combination with those other two things. So I think that it's a very well played moment that caps off such a great scene. I honestly think that actor Indira Varma deserves a lot of credit for her performance in this scene, since she makes Susie such a deep and interesting character within the space of this one single scene. You really feel her turbulence, creating a strong core to this climax of the episode. Much like a lot of Russell T Davies' Doctor Who episodes, Everything Changes makes sure to have some important post-action to explore the fallout of the episode, and its effects on characters. We get a scene of Susie's corpse being put into the on-site morgue, as everyone returns their alien artifacts as a result of this huge breach of policy and trust. I feel like it creates a sense of change, like this is a catalyst for the organisation moving away from the old ways, changing for the better. I also think that the shot of Jack walking away from the morgue is brilliant, since we see so many cold chambers stacked up throughout the room. It communicates the long and dangerous history of Torchwood with so many deaths. It's extra weighty when you realise that Jack would have been there for basically every single one, since we later find out that he has been part of Torchwood 3 almost since its very inception, so he would have lived through all of these burials. Then on the rooftop of the Millennium Center, Jack explains to Gwen that he can't die. As I mentioned a minute ago, this was the very first time his immortality was revealed, so I like how it's addressed here, with even him not understanding how or why it happens, but all he knows is that he's looking for the Doctor to find out and hopefully fix it. It once again ties Torchwood back into Doctor Who itself, establishing that he still remembers the Doctor and exactly what happened during their travels, creating that cohesion I've spoken about earlier. It also makes sense for Jack to invite Gwen into Torchwood now that there is an opening. It makes so much sense for him to do this because all along Gwen has shown a real curiosity and intelligence, essentially earning her place in the same way a Doctor Who companion earns their place on board the TARDIS within their first episode. It also represents Gwen as this force for positive change, since Jack finally agrees with what she said earlier in the pub, having finally understood how much harm the current model of Torchwood is doing. So her joining Torchwood is a way to show the shift of the organisation moving in a more helpful and positive direction. I think it's all a very good way to bring Gwen into the fold, not feeling undeserved or rushed at all. Instead, it's measured and well thought out, with her involvement being justified and her already having something important to bring to the team dynamic. Considering everything it needed to set up, I think that Everything Changes is a very satisfying piece of television that successfully kickstarts Doctor Who's first proper spin-off. K9 and Company doesn't count because it never made it into being a series. Thank God for that. Torchwood had so much to set up within its first episode, especially if it wanted to prove itself worthy of being a thing that exists. However, I feel like Everything Changes does this very well, since it uses what worked for the first episode of modern Doctor Who itself. The plot doesn't get bogged down by some complicated alien invasion. Instead, it uses aliens and science fiction as a backdrop to introduce these characters and establish the world of the show. By making it about Captain Jack and Gwen, the episode doesn't need to cram in the character explorations of the rest of the team, so everything can breathe, with the episode being paced very well. John Barrowman does well as always, making Captain Jack an enigmatic character not unlike the Doctor themselves. But I definitely think that the standouts of the episode are Eve Miles as Gwen Cooper and Indira Varma as Susie Costello. Both do such fantastic jobs in this episode, with their confrontation near the end being one of the best scenes by far. People have always criticised Torchwood for being too overly edgy, but I think that Everything Changes is able to avoid this and establish a mature tone very well. I think Everything Changes deserves a B on the Torchwood Series 1 tier list. There's no hiding that it's an establishing episode, designed to hold the audience's hand and introduce everything to them, but I think it does this very smoothly and well, with a nice sheen of style and class. It's bold with its establishment of this tone, but it was important to do this, to let people know that this was a vastly different show to Doctor Who. Torchwood had a lot of expectation to live up to, and interest was extremely high, with Everything Changes receiving 2.4 million views on BBC 3, and 2.8 million views 3 days later on BBC 2. For context, this was the most viewers any BBC programme had ever had up to this point, so it certainly had people interested. So with this rating success and audience interest, what would be next for Torchwood? Well, it's the Sex Gas episode. And I'd like to give a special thank you to my gold level patrons, Albrecht Erb, Mark Hippold Guy Taylor, and Steph Nevin Miller. Thank you a lot for your support.